Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm gonna wait for Julia from John Cabot University to join. She's gonna interview me today. I'm gonna talk all about Catcalls of NYC and street harassment. By the way, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sophie. I created Catcalls of NYC, and I'm super excited to talk. Hi everyone. I'm super excited to talk about street harassment today. Hi from Singapore. Wow, yeah, where is everyone from? Australia, Singapore. Okay, let's see.
Hi.
Hi, Julia. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, thanks. I'm glad you are able to join.
Thank you for having this live with us.
Of course. Do you want to speak a little bit about John Cabot University so that everyone knows who's watching?
Sure. So I'm Julia and I'm from Rome. I'm the intern for the Office of Health and Wellbeing at John Cabot University. So for those of you who don't know what John Cabot is, it is an American liberal arts university based in Rome. It offers 14 majors and 18 minors. And I graduated from John Cabot in December. And in January, I joined the Health and Wellbeing team. And today I'm live with Sophie to talk about harassment for the Sexual Harassment Awareness Month.
Yay, great.
So I think we can start. So I have a first question. What is Catcalls of New York for those who don't know?
Of course. So for anyone who doesn't know, Catcalls of New York City is an Instagram account and initiative to raise awareness about street harassment. And what we do is we actually write down the messages that people send us. So people submit their stories of street harassment that happen in New York City. And then we write them on the streets where they happen to raise awareness and show people exactly what's being said, where it's being said, and really start conversations. Then we post it online to create more of a dialogue around the issue. So that's what Catcalls of NYC is.
And when did you start this project?
I started it in 2016, so actually 4 years ago as of 2 days ago.
And are you running it all by yourself or you are helped by someone?
So I started it by myself back in 2016, and for a while I was doing it on my own when I had time, but then I realized that I really needed more of a team to keep it going. We were getting so many submissions, so many direct messages. So I started to build a team. People started to reach out saying they wanted to be involved. They asked if they could help chalk and respond to DMs. So now it's really a team project. There are a team of about 20 volunteers who help with Catcalls of NYC now.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
And I saw that there are a lot of pages around the world that are called Catcalls of name of a city. And I already interviewed Alessia that manages the Catcalls of Rome page. But how many Catcalls of pages exist now?
Mm-hmm. So honestly, it's hard to keep track sometimes because there are new Catcalls of pages started every day. But as of the ones that I know that are active and that post a lot, there are about 150 that are active right now around the world. They're on 6 continents in 49 countries. And like I said, in 150 places around the world. So it's really grown hugely since starting in 2016.
And if someone wants to start a catcall of in their own city, I saw that someone was also asking question about it in the comments to the live. What should they do?
So if you want to start a Catcalls of your city, first, very important, please check to see if it exists already, because there are so many that are already up and running that it's really important to check first. Just type it into the search box, Catcalls of, and then make sure you check different variations of the spelling. Maybe it's, for example, for New York, it could be New York, it could be NYC. So just check to make sure that one doesn't already exist in your city. And if it doesn't, then go online to chalkback.org and make a request to start an account in your city. And basically what we do is we just ask you to send us a quick video, if you're comfortable, saying why you want to start an account and, you know, why you care about this issue. And then after that, we help you get started. We give you, you know, all of the information you need, all of the tips that we all have from running accounts. And then you can be part of Chalk Back and get the support that you need to have an active account that helps your city.
So if anyone who's listening wants to start account, they have just to ask you and visit the website. Okay, that's pretty easy. Now a more serious question. So what effects your Instagram page has on perpetrators of verbal sexual harassment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's so hard. This is always the hardest question. Like, how is this actually impacting catcallers and harassers? Are people changing their mind and seeing the messages in the street and then saying, okay, I won't catcall anymore? Obviously, that's the goal. I want people to maybe even see their own catcall on the street and then say, oh, wow, I shouldn't have said that. But it's hard to track. So I've never had the experience of speaking to someone who said, oh, yeah, I catcall all the time and now I'm not going to anymore. So like I said, it's really hard to know. I do think that what we are doing that's really important is raising awareness and making more people who have been victims of street harassment speak up and talk about this. I also think we're educating people who don't know about street harassment to step in and say something. So I think the main impact that we're having indirectly on the perpetrators of sexual harassment is making the behavior less acceptable so that more people will stand up against it, more people will step in and, you know, stand up for someone else facing it. I think that is the more measurable impact, whereas it's hard to know if harassers harass and then see the chalk and then say, oh, never mind, I won't do that anymore. It's hard to know. That could be the case also. I have had some interesting conversations with men who have said that it's a compliment. And then I explain to them why it's not a compliment. And it's just hard to know, like I said, if it sinks in, if it changes their mind. It's hard to tell, but I hope so.
But at least it's good to know that you are doing something to stop it and you are active in trying to solve a problem that it's so relevant right now for so many of us.
Right, absolutely.
So do you think that catcalls are different in different parts of the world, that they depend more on culture, or have you noticed that talking with people that manage the different pages that they have some common features, let's say?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that it's actually surprisingly common. So there are certain comments that maybe are sent into the New York City page. Like, for example, one that comes to mind, sometimes a same-sex couple will be targeted by a man. So maybe two women are holding hands and a man will say, I could turn you straight. And that's been sent into New York. That's also been sent into London. That's also been sent into the account Catcalls of Yui, a similar comment in Trinidad and Tobago. So it's actually amazing how there are commonalities, like the exact same comment almost around the world. That being said, I do think that there are differences in different cultures. So I asked a few of the Catcalls of accounts about what they think is special about their city that sets them apart from other cities. So Catcalls of Yui, once again in Trinidad and Tobago, said that catcalls are seen as compliments and part of the culture. So it's so common that it's not really challenged at all in the culture. And that also there's a lot of gender-based violence in general in their country. So people don't make the connection between catcalling and gender-based violence that's happening. And there aren't a lot of laws against gender-based violence. Catcalls of Hanover said that a lot of people send in stories of being followed home. You know, again, these aren't completely unique. These can happen everywhere, but these are just things that people around the world have noticed about their city. Catcalls of Hildesheim, also in Germany, said that people are catcalled from cars a lot. I don't know, that doesn't happen maybe as much in New York in my experience, so that could be specific to there. And then also catcalls of Gainesville in Florida. What the owner of that account said is that there are a lot of Trump supporters in Gainesville, Florida. So a lot of people are afraid that not only are there going to be sexist comments, but also racist comments and just a lot of hate coming from, I think she called them like MAGA people, people who support Trump. So it's interesting to see the different patterns around the world. But once again, I think what's striking is how similar it is in so many situations.
So yeah, from what you're saying, we can say that it has some similarities, but then depending on the culture you're in, the perception of catcalls may be different, right?
Yes.
Yeah, on this purpose, a student at John Cabot wrote a beautiful piece about being catcalled in Italy. So that's I'm going to read it to you so we can comment it together. The girl is called Adriana De Noble, and she's a senior majoring in English literature here at GCU. So she wrote, "When I first came to Italy, I was 18 and newly introduced to the world of dating. I remember calling my mom on the phone and telling her, 'Mom, I never gotten this much male attention in my life.' Since then, this statement is still true, but now that I'm a bit older and more used to the culture, I can attempt to understand why. Gender dynamics are different here, and even though I've been catcalled since I was 14 years old and living in the suburbs of New Jersey, something about the way men spoke and looked at me in Italy was different. If I was walking in New York City and someone catcalled me, it would be directed at a specific body part. When I'm walking alone in Rome, they don't blatantly sexualize me by targeting a body part, but they whisper bellissima or meravigliosa. Like the concept of woman here, I am complimented with beautiful words as a sign of admiration, but I'm jeered at like a thing. Whether a woman is spoken to as less than, or if she's spoken to as almost untouchable, objectification exists in the realms of both exploitation and glorification, disallowing women to operate in the same field as men. So, what do you think about it? Do you believe that compliments like beautiful and marvelous can be aggressive?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that's such an accurate thought process about how whether it's something like beautiful or marvelous, or whether it's something targeted towards a certain part of the body, it's still objectification. So I really liked what she said there. I guess the way I always think about catcalling in New York City is that it exists on a spectrum. So maybe one day it's hello, beautiful, you're sexy, you're gorgeous, and this kind of supposed compliment, this appreciation. And then maybe the next day in New York, it's, I want to fuck you, or something really sexual and vulgar and aggressive. So for me, the problem with that is you never know what you're going to get. So it's all part of this continuous experience of being looked at, being watched, having your body somehow up for male consumption all the time. So I think that that experience resonates with me because it doesn't really matter what's said. It's still the same idea that you're being looked at and you're being watched and you're always kind of open to male consumption, as a woman. So I think that it's really important to focus not just on the words, but on the gender behaviors and why is this happening in the first place? Why is it that men feel like it's okay to say these things? And why do they think that they need to give their opinion to a stranger on the street about their appearance? That would never happen the other way around. So I think it's important to look at the behavior as a whole and also realize how it's part of this bigger structure of gender roles and gender-based violence. And even if there's something small like a compliment, it can't really be taken apart from the bigger stuff, like the really aggressive sexual comments, at least in my experience in New York. And from what from what you've told me, maybe it's not exactly the same in Italy. Maybe it stays at the appreciation and it doesn't escalate to sexualization and the more aggressive comments. But in my opinion, it's all part of the same behavior. And in that way, it's really hard to say that one is okay and one is not okay.
Yeah, I'm reading now that Celeste Santana official wrote that she lived in Rome and the catcall there is on a whole another level. And the worst part is even the women see it as normal. They kind of like it. It's like a sense of approval on how beautiful you are. So about it, I want just to say that, as Sophie was saying, it can vary. Like catcalls can be a compliment, but they can be also very aggressive and sexual. But it is true that especially older women in Italy tend to see it as a compliment, and if you try to talk to people and say, "See, I've been catcalled," they were like, "We don't even have a word for catcalling in Italian." So it's really difficult also to express this kind of behavior because you don't have the word for expressing it, and that says a lot about the culture, I guess.
Right, yeah, and it's hard also to argue, especially if it's maybe an older woman telling you, no, you should just take the compliment. I think that puts someone in a really difficult position if they feel uncomfortable and unsafe and they don't like it. I think it's hard to argue with someone who's also facing the same thing but says that it's a compliment. It's tricky, yeah.
Yeah. So, what effect do you think the rise in support for the Me Too movement since October 2017 has had on your page, and what differences can you see in the way women now respond to catcalls compared with, say, 5 years ago when you started 4 years ago?
Yeah, so I mean, very tangibly, when the Me Too movement started by Tarana Burke, it went viral in 2017, and that's when the tweet went viral, and so many people were talking all of a sudden about sexual harassment, mostly in the workplace, but also beyond. So very tangibly, what effect that had was that all of a sudden people started paying attention to Catcalls of NYC also. So for a while, Catcalls of NYC was very small. Back, 3 years ago, it was really small. It had like a few hundred followers. And then after the Me Too movement went viral, that's when it got picked up and people were more focused on sexual harassment. So I think a great impact that the Me Too movement has had specifically on this page is making more people pay attention to sexual harassment in general, all across different levels of society, whether it's the workplace or the street or the school. So it's been great because I think more people have been paying attention. More people have been sharing their stories, which is amazing, both here and on Twitter and beyond. So I think that is mainly the impact that the Me Too movement has had, a willingness to finally pay more attention to this problem and also have more people share their stories. That being said, I also think there's a lot of backlash to the Me Too movement. So there have been, some men who say that the Me Too movement is an attack on them, or the Me Too movement is making it so that they can't talk to women anymore. Or, they can't mentor a younger woman because it's going to look bad and maybe they could accidentally harass her. So I think that it's brought up a lot of fear maybe and defensiveness from a lot of, cis men who are now worried, they say, to talk to women. I think that the point of the Me Too movement is to have dialogues about sexual harassment and figure out how it can be prevented going forward. But I do think that there are certain people who feel like the Me Too movement is specifically an attack on them and their behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really can get what you're saying about men feeling a bit too accused too much about like being misbehaving, because also I think it's important like to know that usually people gender also the catcalls, that it's not true that like it's just men that catcalls women, but like women can catcall other women's and men can catcall other men. That's also an important part. And also women sometimes catcall men, so like we really need to understand that we are also generalizing, not we as the two of us, but like in general.
Right, yeah, no, I think it's really important to expand our views of gender and how different gender roles work, and also how gender is not necessarily a binary thing. So people also face harassment because of their gender identity and because of their sexuality and for all sorts of reasons beyond just men, catcalling women. Yeah.
So, do you think applying specific sanction to anyone who catcalls in public would be an effective deterrent? Or is this something that you can only be changed through education and society?
Yeah, so this is a big question right now. I know in certain places they try to impose fines on catcalling, and at least in the US, I don't think it's an effective way to solve the problem, and I think that's for a few reasons. The first reason is that it would target specific populations. It would target low-income populations, and it would target people of color based on what we've seen in the US from police. So it could be a really problematic solution that wouldn't actually solve the problem, and it would create a new problem of people being targeted in specific ways. But that being said, I just don't think it's enough. I think that giving someone a fine for catcalling isn't going to change their mind about that it was okay, you know? So I think that people need to be educated. They need to have conversations. They need to hear the stories of the people who are being harassed. I think that's the most important part. And I think that's a really good way to change people's minds, by hearing people's stories, by having conversations about why it's not a compliment, why it's wrong. I think that that's way more effective than giving someone a fine for doing this. And I just don't think it's also realistic, because a catcall can happen in one moment and then the person is gone. So, you know, I think we really need to get to the root of the problem and not try to catch every person who catcalls, because it's such a cultural problem. It's, you know, it's too widespread to just try to fix it with fines, in my opinion.
No, yeah, that would be a bit difficult to have the police running after people just for being speaking in the street, because that's what they do most of the time.
Right.
And what would you say to a young man who argues that publicly expressing appreciation for another individual's physical attractiveness is a normal reaction, and that silencing catcalls amounts effectively to emasculation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, this is such an interesting question. I think that the whole thing about feminism and sexual harassment is that it needs to be about people of all genders. So we need specifically to speak to those men who might think that it's a compliment, or it's somehow their right as a man or their duty as a man to compliment someone, because that just gets back to this really problematic notion of what it means to be a man. I think that so many men feel like in order to be masculine, they need to catcall, they need to sexually harass, they need to do all sorts of things. And then the bigger issue is when their masculinity is challenged, they can get very upset. We see this all the time with catcalls. When someone sends in a catcall, you know, a man said, "You're beautiful" to them, and then they didn't respond. And then the man said, you know, "Fuck you, you bitch," all of that, because he felt like he was being rejected and his masculinity was being challenged. So this is a big problem, because it can lead to violence and it could lead to escalated situations. So my answer to that specific man who would wonder, you know, why isn't this my right to do this, and I don't want to feel emasculated, I think we need to change the notions of what it means to be masculine. I mean, right now there are certain toxic notions of masculinity that lead to catcalling. Exactly, someone commented toxic masculinity. Yes, yeah. Toxic masculinity. That lead to catcalling, sexual harassment, and more violent sexual abuse. So I think that we really need to challenge these more damaging parts of masculinity and get rid of them, because no boy or man should have to harass in order to be seen as masculine, or even, you know, objectify or compliment. It's all part of the same thing, and it shouldn't be a part of masculinity, in my opinion.
No, I mean, toxic masculinity is a really huge problem, and as we said before, like, we need to educate future generation to solve the problem. There is no other way to put an end to it if not like through education and through compassion and empathy. It's all it takes to try and understand. But I think that this kind of project can be helpful, because if we start talking about it, if we decide that this is a problem and that we need to solve it, something can start changing. If everyone keeps saying it's just normal, keep going, it has never happened, why it should be different with you, then the problem won't be solved and will continue. In a newspaper some time ago, I read that some women were responding to catcalls, removing the ladders of workmen that were working in buildings in New York City. Do you think that such extreme act can be useful, or do you think it's just like a way to, I don't know, to overreact about the situation?
Wait, hold on. They were taking away the ladders of workers in New York City so that they couldn't catcall?
Yeah, they couldn't go down after they catcalled their women.
Oh my gosh, honestly, that's so funny. I hadn't heard that. No, I mean, I think, so that doesn't really lead to a productive conversation necessarily. I honestly think it's pretty funny. But I think that the key to solving the problem together is actually having conversations. I think in the moment of being catcalled and harassed, this is my experience and so many people's experience, that it's really hard to respond. It's hard to turn around and say, why didn't you just respect me in that moment? You know, why do you treat me like this? So I think that there are really good ways to facilitate conversation, maybe with construction workers, but, you know, all people who catcall. And yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, that's not the most productive way, but I get the message. It sends a message. And I think it is really important to send messages. And it didn't seem like anyone was in danger in that situation. So I think that's, yeah, like I said, it's pretty funny, but not the most productive.
Yeah. And now that we are forced to be home and we can't leave our houses, how do you keep fighting harassment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So something that I'm really passionate about, because I faced it a lot, especially since starting Catcalls of NYC, is online harassment. And online harassment reminds me a lot of street harassment, actually, because just like when you're walking down the street and someone says something to you unsolicited and out of nowhere, on the internet, people can do the same thing. And I faced a lot of online harassment in many different ways from different people. And it can be very upsetting because if I just open my phone and try to post on Instagram or look at what my friends are doing, and all of a sudden I have a message that says, you know, I'm gonna harass you, or I'm gonna fuck you, or, you know, you're a cunt, like really strongly worded messages, it really takes me aback and it makes me feel less safe. You know, I've had instances of someone threatening to come to an in-person event. So it's a scary behavior, and it happens a lot to a lot of people, especially to a lot of people who are doing work about feminism and activism and ending sexual harassment. So that's something that now that we're inside, I'm going to focus more on, because online harassment is still happening a lot. That being said, street harassment is still happening. Some people are saying that street harassment is scarier now because there are less people on the street. So people are facing scarier versions of street harassment because they're very isolated if they have to go outside for some reason. So I'm going to continue to focus on street harassment, online harassment. I'm working on different campaigns with different people for, you know, both Sexual Assault Awareness Month and International Anti-Street Harassment Week. So there's still a lot to be done. This is still a problem that's not going to go away. Right now, it's less relevant because we're all inside, but once again, it's all part of this bigger behavior. It's part of this bigger system of gender-based violence. So it's related to online harassment. It's related, like I forgot to mention, it's related to domestic violence, which is peaking right now due to everyone being home. So there are a lot of important issues to talk about that are relevant to people who face street harassment.
Also, I think that what is more concerning about online harassment is that their comments are visible to anyone, and they can be even more dangerous because people can feel they have the right to say whatever they want, and if other people keep looking at what they're saying and validate what they're saying, you enter in a cycle that it's difficult to stop. So I think it's also important to try to avoid like certain kind of behavior online, also because people validate a lot what people write.
Yeah, I do think that, like you said, people are more free online because they can say whatever they want, and maybe people will validate what they're saying too. So it can escalate a lot online. And people can also make multiple accounts. So if you block someone, they can make a new account and continue to harass you. So there are all sorts of difficult parts of online harassment that are different from street harassment.
Okay, I think that now we can browse some of the questions they wrote in the comments and see what they've been saying. So,
I have one. What's the best way to respond to a catcall? That's always a good question. Because this is the most difficult question to answer. What's the best way to respond to the catcall? There's no one answer. It always depends on the situation. It depends how safe you feel, if there are other people around. Maybe you can say something back and that would feel good, but maybe it would make you feel more unsafe. It could escalate the situation. That's the worst part. When people respond, it can escalate the situation. And then when people don't respond, it can also escalate the situation, because sometimes a harasser will get mad that you didn't respond. So the answer to that question is that there is no one answer, and it always depends on the individual situation.
Another question is, where is the line between a compliment and a catcalling?
Where is the line between a compliment and a catcall? I mean, what I always say about this is that it depends on the person who's receiving it. So for someone walking down the street and maybe a man says to them, hey, beautiful, and they meant it as a compliment, but maybe this is a 12-year-old girl trying to go to school and she feels extremely unsafe and uncomfortable. Why is he looking at me? That's a catcall. But if you said hi beautiful to your friend or your partner, that would be a compliment. So it really depends on the context. It depends on the power dynamics of the two people involved. So if it's someone who's particularly vulnerable in public space, it's more likely to feel like a catcall than a compliment. My opinion is always be on the safe side. Don't really talk to people in public because it's not common, especially in New York. It's not common for people to just talk to each other in public. So if you want to compliment someone in a safe way, it's best to do it in a different space, maybe, I don't know, in a bar or on a date or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think it also depends on the culture, because I think that, as we were saying before, Italy and the US, even though they are quite similar, they also have like two cultures that may be different in many ways. And so even people, when they travel, they need to be aware of that maybe what for them is a safe environment in some other places can't be that safe. We see that a lot because in our university we have students from more than 70 countries, and they all come and live in Rome all together, and I have friends that like come from everywhere in the world. And sometimes you see how different it can be, the reaction to how also they try to talk with people, because for instance people from South America are more expansive, they like to touch you more when they talk, and for a person from the UK, that is a huge invasion of private space. So I think that we need also to be more aware of like who we are talking to. What do you think?
Absolutely. So that's why it always needs to be a conversation. Like there will never be an end to conversations about sexual harassment, because there are so many parts to it, and people have so many different identities, so many different experiences, that not only does it depend on where someone's from, it also depends on someone's experiences that they've had in their life. So what will make someone uncomfortable is just different based on the person, based on where they're from, based on the culture they grew up in, based on their identity. So I think that it always needs to be an ongoing conversation. And the problem right now is that it's not a conversation at all. People just say, this is all normal based on where, so in Italy, for example, there wouldn't be a productive conversation right now going on about street harassment and different cultures coming together. So I feel like in places around the world, we need to have these ongoing dialogues about what is right, what is wrong, and how we can continue to provide space for people to speak up about what makes them feel uncomfortable. It's so important.
So another question is, what is street harassment like in Italy? Okay, maybe that's more for me.
Yeah.
As I was saying before, it's more like complimenting women on the overall, saying like you're beautiful, you're marvelous. It's like sexualized, even if you look at the page Catcalls of Rome, you can see a lot of that incident happening in Rome as well. But another thing I've been observing lately is that it's older men that used to catcall more. Like in the younger people, it's something that's not happening that much, and I'm happy about it because something is changing. And like you see men catcalling more when they're in group than when they're alone. That's a bit more scary, if I have to be honest, because even if you are in a group of girls, it can be more dangerous if more than one man approaches you and you are just scared more, like you're more scared.
Yeah, definitely. I have another question too that I see. Okay. It's how can we put an end to toxic masculinity? And I guess there are probably certain men, cis, straight men, who don't want to participate in conversations about feminism because they feel like it's not related to them somehow, it's not for them. And I think the way to end toxic masculinity is to have more people involved in the conversations. So people who are feel that they're forced to be more masculine in order to be a man. Those are the people who we need to participate in conversations around feminism and talk about how we can redefine what masculinity looks like, which is basically just crossing everything out and just saying it can be so many things. Because I think that the goal of feminism is to have more freedom when it comes to gender. There shouldn't be strict gender roles for anyone.
And do you think that's something that should start more within the family or in school or like in friends group? What's like your opinion about that?
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, I guess it definitely, I think it starts to happen in the home from an early age. I'm not like an expert on this, but I think that within families, there are already really quickly, notions of gender and what's a girl and what's a boy. So that's already kind of setting up this binary and what turns out to be toxic. And then in the school, it just happens more and more with friend groups and dynamics. So I think it needs to happen within the home, but also within the school, and then also in other spaces, like on social media. I think it would be really productive to find a way to include more people in these conversations on social media. And I'm not sure how to do that because everyone who tends to follow these pages already has experiences or cares about it for some reason. So we need to find new ways to get people to care. And I do think the way to do that is through education in schools because, people don't have to follow a social media page, but they do have to go to school. So that's when you can teach them about these important things.
As I see in the comments, like some people are saying that they feel more comfortable talking about this kind of issue to their friends. So it's also good, in my opinion, to start conversation with your friends about such topics. I know it can seem strange at first to be talking about something so serious when you just hang out, but that is something that can help change the society as well, because you can let your friends think more about what they're doing, and maybe they can start questioning if their behavior is always appropriate or if they need to change something in order to make other people feel good as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that you have to be really brave when it comes to these topics because it's probably easier to not talk about this stuff, especially when you're young and you're with your friends. So I think that if you're comfortable talking to your friends and bringing these important but difficult topics up with them, that's great. You're amazing then.
So the other girl says that in Indonesia, the catcalling is portrayed as normal and people think of it as a compliment. She has never been catcalled, but thankfully she can stand for herself. Maybe she can start an account for Indonesia.
Yeah, I mean, that would be great. I think there is one account in Indonesia that I can find for you after if you send me a DM. Because I think this is a problem that people say that it's a compliment in places around the world, but the people facing it do not feel that it is a compliment. So that would be great.
Okay, let's see if there are any other questions.
I mean, there's a question about domestic violence. It says, can domestic violence happen between siblings, or would that just be a rivalry? My suggestion, and again, I'm not an expert on this, is just to talk to someone you trust about this and talk more specifically about what's happening. Because if you feel like something bad is happening, it's really important to talk to someone and get help if possible.
Yeah. Okay, I think if there are any other new questions, we already said that there is no a single way to respond catcalling, but you have to evaluate according to the situation. You have any other comments?
No, that was great. I think it's really important to talk about the different cultural aspects of catcalling and keep this conversation going. So if anyone has any other questions for us, obviously you can just DM either of us and talk more about it going forward.
Thank you for doing that with us. In our university, we validate very much sexual harassment, and we really want to spread the word and make people think more about it. also, what's important to us is to expand on the cultural side of it, because as I said before, John Cabot University has students from everywhere in the world, more than 70 countries. So it's easy to misinterpret or misregard people's feeling and way of acting. But we really want everyone to feel safe and to be able to express anyone. I feel that you and everyone else that has been watching this live is safe at home right now. I know it's a very stressful people, but if you happen to be catcalled online or to be harassed online, share your story with Sophie. She will more than happy to to share it with the world and to make everyone be aware of what's happening right now.
Yeah. Yeah, please feel free to share any stories and even talk about how this situation is affecting you right now. You know, it's a very difficult and uncertain time, and I'm happy to listen specifically to stories about this time and how it's affecting you specifically.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.